All right, I want to thank Chris Merrill and AFI Productions for putting that together. And without further ado, let's start welcoming our guests one by one. To begin with, on behalf of A Most Violent Year, a film about an immigrant businessman's struggles to make it in America, please welcome an Oscar nominee for Margin Call, writer-director J.C. Chandor. On behalf of Whiplash, a film about an ambitious young drummer and his complicated relationship with his instructor, please welcome writer-director Damien Chazelle. Yep. On behalf of 2 Days, One Night, a film about a woman who loses her job and asks her colleagues to sacrifice so that she can have it back, as well as The Immigrant, another film earlier this year. Please welcome an Oscar winner for La Vie en Rose, actress Marion Cotillard. On behalf of Nightcrawler, a film about a man who records footage of tragedies that he then sells to the local news, as well as Enemy, another excellent film from earlier this year. Please welcome an Oscar nominee for Brokeback Mountain, actor Jake Gyllenhaal. On behalf of The Skeleton Twins, a film about a man whose suicide attempt leads to a reunion with his equally troubled twin sister, as well as the disappearance of Eleanor Rigby, another excellent film earlier this year. Please welcome actor Bill Hader. Yep. On behalf of Fort Bliss, a film about a woman who is torn between duty to her country and to her family, please welcome actress Michelle Monaghan. On behalf of Still Alice, a film about a woman who is diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease and the way that she and her family handle the news. Please welcome, I should also mention also this year, two other great indies, Camp X-Ray and Clouds of Sils Maria. Please welcome actress Kristen Stewart. And last but certainly not least, on behalf of Snowpiercer, a film about a post-apocalyptic world in which the world's only surviving humans engage in class warfare of an interesting sort, as well as the Grand Budapest Hotel and Only Lovers Left Alive from earlier this year. Please welcome an Oscar winner for Michael Clayton, actress Tilda Swinton. That is what you call a panel. Thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate it. And particularly to talk about independent films. But before we get into sort of big picture on that, I just wonder if you can give us the backstory of how you each came to the independent film that you're here today to talk about. And JC, maybe we can start with you and A Most Violent Year. How did this come to happen?
I was cleaning up from Hurricane Sandy at my house, and I had about 3 or 4 years. I'd been like collecting, probably longer than that actually, just sort of stowing away ideas, and then finally, you know, and I didn't quite know where they were going to sit and really where they belonged. And then the image of the main character and the sort of suits he was wearing and his hair, strangely, and the way that he presented himself when he walked in a room. And that is usually the last thing I need. And then I sat down and wrote it. And it's a cool process when you realize that. It's like, boom, there's the movie. And it was just that image of the way he walked into a room and what he wanted the room to see.
Thank you. We'll go back and forth on the sides here. So, Tilda, would you share with us about Snowpiercer? How did that come to be for you?
Well, Bong Joon-ho has been one of my favorite filmmakers ever since I first saw, I suppose, The Host. Who's seen The Host here? Yeah, exactly. So you know what it's like to want to work with Bong Joon-ho, and that happened to me. And we met and we became pals. And he sent me the script of Snowpiercer and said, well, there's nothing in this one for you. So I went, fine, yeah, sure. And about a month later, he sent me an email and said, what about this? What about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? What about this mild-mannered man in a suit? And I just wanted to hang with this guy and be on this amazing ride of this film. So I said, let's dress up. So that was it, really. Very simple.
Thank you. Damien, Whiplash, it's got a really interesting and over a few years story of coming to be, right?
Yeah, I'd been kind of in LA writing for hire for a few years, and with, sort of it was how I was kind of paying the bills, but I kind of knew I wanted to do something personal, something that, maybe that I could direct myself. I was kind of saving away what that would be while I was writing for other people, and I remember, I just kind of ultimately just thought, well, maybe what I'll try to do is just write about this experience I had as a jazz drummer in high school. I was in a kind of competitive music ensemble with a somewhat sadistic professor, and just kind of there was a memory there, and I've had kind of limited experiences in my life, and it's like that was something that was very kind of intense and emotional, but seemed on the surface like it shouldn't have been. It's just music class. So I decided to write that and kind of see what it would turn into, and it wound up being kind of actually an easy script to write at first because it was the most personal thing I'd done. And then I just wound up kind of sitting on it for a while and rewriting it and tinkering with it, and so the process became longer. But I kind of knew, it was sort of that one project where you kind of, from the outset what it was about, because it was just, if I could just capture the feeling that I had every day I walked into rehearsal feeling just utterly petrified. If I could capture that weird kind of feeling of being afraid as an artist, not afraid for your life, but afraid for your art failing, then that would be something worth putting on screen. That it was just a matter of convincing people to do it.
Thank you. Kristen, Still Alice, I know it's the story of the filmmakers is also the backstory is pretty amazing as well, and I just wonder, what you knew when you signed up and why you decided to do it.
Still Alice is a pretty straightforward, almost, emotional tutorial of what it would be like to start to lose yourself in your mind. In this case, she's got early onset Alzheimer's, and Julianne Moore plays my mother. And I've known her for a number of years, actually, and this movie was made so she could do what she did. And there could be a number of, and there always is, a ton of stuff that comes through that's like, yes, on paper, that is a good role, that is a good decision for me, but that doesn't mean that it's in you, and that doesn't mean that the people making it are the people that you should be making stuff with. And I've just known, for whatever reason with her, that she could be my mother, I didn't need to reach for anything. It was just such a natural, thinking about her in a remotely precarious or not fully confident, strong, perfect position just absolutely kills me. And that's something that you have as a child, for your parents. You start to see a chink in the armor, and it's just the most terrifying thing. And so I love her, and that's why I wanted to do the movie. And the filmmakers as well have an interesting in this case. Richard Glatzer is struggling through dealing with ALS, and he. I hate to trivialize stuff like this. I hope I say it right, but what it took for him to get up every day and make a movie and direct it the way that he did and give us everything that he did was absolutely, I think, completely in the film, and it would have been a different movie without him. And so yeah, it was great. That was it.
Thank you. Marion, I think you've been a fan of the Dardenne brothers from Belgium for a long time, but how did it come to be that you were able to collaborate with them as the first sort of person of international renown who's ever been a part of their movies?
Yeah, I've been a huge fan of their work. I've seen all their movies and I love them all, which is something. And but that was a dream that I didn't allow myself to have, because, as you said, they usually work with Belgian actors and non-well-known actors. It's kind of weird to say it that way, but that's the and so I mean, yeah, it was not even a dream, because I like to have dreams that can come true. And I was very surprised when they asked me to be part of one of their adventures. And when I read the script, it resonated with some deep questions that I had had a year and a half before about people in our society who come to this point where they feel worthless, useless, and if, I mean, the signification of us being on Earth is, we don't really know what it is, but at least if you're here, there's a reason. And I think this is a fact. And when you come to question this reason, well, that is something that I really question in our society, and that's why I wanted to do this movie.
Thank you. Michelle, Fort Bliss, it's not the first time you've played a woman in a role that's traditionally associated with men, and it's done so well and interestingly. It's not really a story that we've seen told very often, and it's interesting. Kristen, I know also this year played a woman in sort of, again, what is stereotypically thought to be a man's world with Camp X-Ray as well. But Michelle, with Fort Bliss, how did that come to you?
It came to me the old-fashioned way. The writer-director, first-time writer-director, Claudia Myers, had actually spent about 5 years making in-house military documentaries for soldiers, and what she kept coming across were veterans that were being redeployed, and she asked this particular man, you're being redeployed for the third time, you're a single father, what do you do with your children? And he said, well, I leave them with the neighbors. And she had always wanted to make not a documentary, but a film, about being a single mother, and she thought, well, that was the perfect scenario. And then having done the research, she realized that it was really, really common. And so when I read the script, she sent it to me, and you hear, and you read and you see stories told from a male perspective, but rarely do you see a story told from a female soldier's perspective. And so I was really struck, and I was really moved by that. And really just this woman's conflict in terms of wanting to serve her country and being really good at her job, but also wanting to be a devoted mother and sort of being judged for that, because women have different expectations, of course. So that inspired me. And when I sat down with Claudia, I immediately knew that she had really, I guess, essentially been able to do her homework, because she was so, this world was so vivid to her, and I knew that she would tell the story in the most authentic way to their experiences, so I was game.
Thanks. Jake, Nightcrawler, Dan Gilroy, I think was sort of also, I believe, a first-time director, and you really went all in on this. What was it that made you feel that it was a project that was worth doing?
Well, I mean, Dan is a first-time filmmaker, but he's also from a family of extraordinary filmmakers. So you have Tony Gilroy and Dan Gilroy and Johnny Gilroy, who's his brother, who was, Tony was producing the movie, and Dan had obviously written an incredible screenplay. If you've seen the movie, it's just one of the best screenplays I'd really ever read, and I think that sort of tossed around a lot, but that's really how I felt about it. So it was this totally idiosyncratic, crazy character in the middle of this script, and then Johnny Gilroy, who was already editing the movie, so he had his family around him, which made me feel safe somehow, even though they're all irrepressibly, wonderfully nuts, but I empathize, because so was my family. So that was really it, I mean, And when words are that good, you feel like you have to shape your mind and yourself into them.
And Bill, you've been in a lot of movies over the years, but not necessarily in a role as meaty and kind of just fascinating as the one in Skeleton Twins, and which reunites you with Kristen Wiig from SNL. And I guess I just wonder how, for you to be doing a dramatic role as well, it was just, how did it all come together?
Well, I had told my agent that I wanted, I'd like to do a drama, break out a little bit, and he's like, well, people only know you from SNL. I don't think it's going to be hard for me to sell you, because you don't really do dramatic work on SNL. This is kind of a nice thing too for anybody actor. He said you should do table reads for movies. Just go do a table read for a bunch of dramas, and they'll get to see that you can do this kind of work. So AV Kaufman in New York, I did a table read, and it was Kate Winslet, Bradley Cooper, Paul Dano, Greta Gerwig, and me. And they were like, why is the guy from SNL here? and I did that table read, and then she was casting Skeleton Twins, and so I met with Craig Johnson, the director, and he was like, yeah, A.V. Kaufman really said I should meet you, but I don't know, if you could, and we talked about it, and it worked out. It was cool.
I guess for anyone who would like to chime in on this one, I wonder, when you decide whether or not to get involved with a project, how much are you actually consciously, how big of a factor in the decision is the budget, the amount of rehearsal time that you would have, things that really are markedly different between a studio film and an indie film? How important is that to you in your decision-making process? Maybe, Tilda, if you would start with you.
Well, I was just trying to think as you were asking the question if there's ever been a film I've been involved with where that hasn't been a really important battery of the whole thing, because even studio movies they've never got enough money.
Yeah, that's true.
They were always on a shoestring, It's really tricky. So, on the one hand, that means that it's always the same old song, so you get used to it. The biggest difference in my humble and relatively limited experience, because most of the films I've made have been from the independent planet, but the few studio pictures that I've been involved with, the great difference is that in the independent filmmaking world, you make friends with chaos. And in the studio world, you don't need to, because if you wrote a scene for Sunshine, and hey, it rains, you wait for 2 weeks. And if you write a scene for Sun in an independent film, you've got the location till 6 o'clock, and you're never going to be able to get back. And you just make your mind up that rain is the best possible outcome, and it's gonna, people are gonna say afterwards, that rain scene, that was the thing that really sold it for me, and you're gonna forget at that instant that you ever wanted anything else. So that's the main difference. So it's always about budget, really. Yeah, that's my opinion.
But is there, and anyone else, please feel free to jump in if you want to add, but I guess I would follow that with the question, I remember reading numerous places, George Clooney, just as an example of somebody who said, one for them, one for me. There was literally a strategization about picking roles that I'm going to do a studio movie if it comes along. Maybe I'll be into it, maybe less so, but it's going to enable me to then go and do the independent movie that I really care about, or to champion, spend time doing other smaller projects that I want to write or direct or appear in. Do any of you actually sort of have that? Is it a calculation? Jake, I know lately in the last few years it's been primarily not at all studio movies, but was there a period when you said, I'm going to deliberately try to have a balance here?
Well, personally, I feel like I like doing things a little bit in the privacy of the dark a little bit. And when something feels a bit smaller, but it's a weird word for it, because whenever I feel like I commit to something, I always feel like it could be it's the biggest thing ever. You know, it feels like everything to me. So, but something about being out of that system allows you to sort of explore in a way that I think convention wouldn't necessarily allow for. So, yeah, I mean, and I also think when a budget is smaller, a particular size, it forces everybody to prepare, or hopefully prepare, in a different way. I would hope that everybody prepared in the same way on a huge budget movie, but I think that there's something about knowing we have limited resources, limited time, like locations we'll lose, and things like what Tilda said. And I think what that does is there's a sort of desperation there, and in that desperation, I think everybody's vulnerable, and I think in that vulnerability, hopefully, I think there's a real sense of intimacy that happens. And unfortunately, that happens with less money.
Yeah. Well, it does seem, though, and I guess if we're trying to get to the root of that problem, I mean, it seems like, unlike what we call the golden age, where Warner Brothers was owned by the Warner Brothers, or what, you know, take it as you will for each studio, all of the studios now are just a piece of a giant conglomerate that answers to shareholders, which demands profit each time, which maybe makes them more risk averse than they would ever otherwise be. And so I just wonder, as creative people, you know, I would think it's disheartening, and do you feel that there's any way that, you know, what is the antidote to that? How is that ever going to change? I mean, JC, I think you have something.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is right now, you know, I'm 40 years old, and when I used to go to see art films, or what you would call an independent film, you know, the screen that I would see it on is the equivalent of the screen that's in my living room that costs like $650. So to sort of compare the storytelling opportunities that we have right now and hold it sort of hostage almost to this idea of what a movie was and what a studio movie was. I mean, studios, the great thing about independent films right now is that there's no competition from a studio film, basically. So the studios are not making and can't. It's a, you know, I've got young kids, I'd like them to put them through college, but, you know, I don't want to make the movies that they're making right now, for the most part, as horrible as that sounds. But that's a tremendous opportunity for what these movies and the amount of films that are getting made, because there's this massive, massive void. The simple, terrible problem is it's hard to make a living making those movies. But if you can, and if you make, you know, you have to make sacrifices in your own life to do it, basically. But to gain that creative freedom that comes with those choices, I hope it works out, but the hope is you get to tell stories for a longer period of time, because you're telling good ones.
But what's sort of disconcerting to me is that even indie movies feel squeezed right now. And if you look at, in the 7 years since, actually at the same Oscars, I believe Tilda and Marion both won, the top Oscar winners at that year were all made, with the exception of Michael Clayton, interestingly, but all the others were made by companies that are no longer here. 7 years later, we've had the economic collapse, we've had the DVD bubble kind of burst, but it's kind of amazing that Picture House is not here, with Paramount Vantage is not here, Warner Independent, Miramax is not in the same way. So what is it that even independent movies are being squeezed in that way? And I know, you know, Damien, you're a big cineast, and I think you've kind of grown up in this environment as this is happening. What do you make of it? Is it troubling to you that even your independent films that you're trying to make are getting harder to make?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously there's a lot of, you know, troubling stuff going on, but I guess but maybe this is just my way of getting, you know, sort of waking up in the morning. I sort of insist on being naively optimistic. You know, I think that at the same time as I see companies closing, there are new, there's A24 that did JC's movie. There's new companies appearing, filling those voids. I think the key thing is, at least from what I see, is that the audience hasn't gone away for these movies, and I think time and again you see that. So I like to naively think that, we're on like a 20-year cycle, and like the studio, entrenchment of the 60s kind of led to the 70s golden age, and what happened in the 80s led to the 90s kind of explosion of event cinema, and that we're kind of gonna have another, the 2000s, early 2000 teens will lead to, and again, that might be total naive, wishful thinking, but I like to think that it goes and it ebbs and flows, and that, I don't know, and that every time it seems like there's a door closing, that, hopefully there's another door opening. I just think the key thing is that people are still out there who want to see these kinds of movies.
Is this sort of greater challenge of adding, or of making even independent films what we think is driving more and more talented people like Michelle to go and make, movies, or rather work in television, where you've got, just in the last year, Kathy Bates, Jessica Lange, Matthew McConaughey, Woody Harrelson, Michelle Monaghan, many, many talented people that we could keep going, who are finding that they are offered better roles, better opportunities to show what they do on television. Do you feel that there's a direct connection, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of creative people in this town, writers, actors, directors who are now being, they're filling that creative void that JC, I think, was talking about, that studios aren't making great dramatic films and aren't really necessarily making bold choices all the time and exciting choices for creative people. So, it's one of those things that if, I personally, for me, if the material is great, I don't really care what medium it's in, if it's exciting and something I can connect to, I don't care if it's big or small, or if it's, cable. It's nice to have options, because it seems like a lot of the options are dwindling. So when you see some doors open in terms of, places to be creative, that's really fortunate.
And Bill, interestingly, you kind of did the reverse, TV to film now, and I just wonder, have you found that the kind of experience of what it takes to put together an SNL episode each week, or things like that, are actually sort of good preparation for working in an indie format, where it's, I would imagine, again, a lot of hard work, under pressure, time sensitive, all of that? I mean, is that a similar?
Yeah, no, I mean, Skeleton Twins was $1 million and done in like 20 days. And we were, but the cool thing about that is kind of like what Jake was saying, was that everybody on the set of that movie, the crew, they were really young, and it was small, and they were excited, and they felt like it was such a privilege to work on a movie, and it was just awesome, it was just such a great feeling being on that. But yeah, it is. You don't do a movie in a week. SNL we did in a week. That sucked. But yeah.
I want to bring up Sundance, because it seems like so many including the films that are up here, really came out of there. I know Damien, both the short and the feature of Whiplash, certainly JC, Margin Call, which led to All Is Lost with Mr. Sundance. And Kristen, I mean, I don't know if it's acknowledged enough. I think you're sort of like one of the Sundance queens. When you look at the list, I mean, it's amazing. Let's just note, Adventureland, Yellow Handkerchief, Welcome to the Rileys, The Runaways, on and on, and I think Camp X-Ray this year. It's pretty impressive, and I just wonder, what your experience with that has been as a launching pad for these films that really need a little nurturing.
Yeah, it's like, you're always going to want a huge launching pad for what you've just dumped your entire, life's energy and soul and heart into and whatever. And it's always nice to share with people, because, what pushes you into the experience, which is that connection and doing something with people and really just letting that fire get bigger between the two of you. It can actually ignite in such an expansive, amazing way with the public, and that's great. But there is also something that feels cool about the us and them factor of, not everybody loves what we're doing, but the few that do are like, our brothers. You know what I mean? It's like it feels great to go to Sundance because it's something that wouldn't, get like, it's not about the attention, it's just about like, the experience of it and like looking at something together. And that's fun. That's why we make movies. And it's a fun place to be. You get to like go back with all the guys that you made the movie with and go like, yeah, this is a place where people are gonna pay attention and like it. And it's just fun.
That'll be the last place to go as far as indies, are more sort of under the gun. It is nice to go to a place where they're really appreciated. And Damien, I want to come back to you because, as we just mentioned, it was Whiplash started as a short, grew into a feature, and in fact, that's how many of the best indies of the last few years have come to be. Bottle Rocket, Half Nelson, Napoleon Dynamite, Martha Marcy, May Marlene, Short Term 12. Is there something to that where is that, if you were talking to a room of aspiring, directors, would you encourage them to make a short first? And JC, I think you can please weigh in as well after.
Were you in the labs, or was that short?
Not really. The labs did actually wind up helping us with sort of an advisor here in LA, but I missed out on the actual. Did you do the full lab?
Couldn't fill out the application in time.
I think I've applied to the lab. I'd spent about 5 years of my life applying to the lab, and so I became very used to the rejection letter. I don't know. I didn't really set out wanting to do the short. I'd written this full script and thought, I'll just do this. And so it seemed at the time, the short seemed like a digression. It seemed like just born of necessity. It's just some kind of last-ditch effort to convince people that this was makeable. But looking back, it became the rehearsal period that we didn't have on the feature in a way. It became a way of developing a rapport with some of the actors who carried over, figuring out things I liked about how I shot the scene, things I didn't like, things that I could change about my approach to it. So I don't know. I mean, it certainly was helpful in my case. I don't know if it's. I guess what I caution is this sort of idea that I think I find like more and more now in Hollywood, people are more and more kind of reticent about reading scripts, let alone sort of imagining the life that might be beyond them. And we're in a world now where there's so much short form content that I think it's almost becoming more and more of an expectation for filmmakers to kind of do like whether it's a sizzle reel or do the entire movie like already. And I find that I sort of morally like disagree with that. I find that sort of an unfair kind of supposition or unfair burden. But so I don't like it becoming the norm, but I do think that in these individual cases, it absolutely can be extremely helpful. And it certainly, I don't think we would have been able to make the movie the way we wanted to make it without having both this sort of calling card and our own kind of internal, time to screw things up.
Yeah, please, Jake.
Actually, when you asked the first question, I was thinking about when Dan Gilroy came to me with the script of the movie of Nightcrawler. I remember Delroy Lindo being at the Sundance Lab. Delroy Lindo, I was part of the sort of actors gang there many years ago, over a decade ago. And Delroy Lindo said, you have to be careful because it's very hard when you're working with a first-time writer-director that it's very hard for them to translate 2D into 3D. And because they've been with it for so long that they've had it in their mind a certain way, and then all of a sudden you come in and fuck it up. And I remember thinking that's a really good barometer as an actor to figure out how a writer-director is seeing their film. And I remember when I met with Dan specifically, he was willing to explore beyond what his 2D world had been. And I think that was one of the biggest lessons of my career, and I took that from Sundance, from the lab. I carry it with me always. Yeah.
What lab? Did you go as an actor? Or
I went as an actor, yeah. And I was there. I was there for this movie, The Mudge Boy. I remember that? Yeah. And Michael Shannon was there. Remember that? At the time.
Awesome. Marion, I guess everybody faces at one point or another kind of a turning point, and I would imagine that a big one for you was right after La Vie en Rose. You're now having to decide, I should say after all the great reception for La Vie en Rose, now you have to decide, do I want to work in France? Do I want to work in America? Do I want to do indie movies? Do I want to do big movies? And I know you had a lot of options at that point and continue to. So what was it that motivated you to primarily, almost exclusively, with the exception of the Christopher Nolan movies, which are basically, he sort of works outside the studio system while being a part of it, you've pretty much remained in indie movies, be they in Europe or the United States. How did you decide this is the direction you wanted to take your career?
I don't think I decide much, actually. I think that, well, first of all, I feel very lucky that I can explore more than my culture. When I was a kid and I wanted to be an actress, I admired people like Peter Sellers, who would disappear into a role, or Sarah Laurence Olivier, or today like Toni Collette is. That was my dream, was to be able to jump from a person to another and be totally different, and to explore as much as I could human beings, and maybe answer a few of my questions that I had, and I had a lot of questions when I was a kid. So yeah, I feel lucky that I can explore Polish culture or Italian culture or Indian culture. The thing is, I've always thought that the character and the story will choose me instead of me choosing a story. So, voila.
Jake, Marion says it sort of wasn't a decision. I wonder, though, did you, again, there seems to be such a point, again, a turning point where I guess in some ways it seems like 2010, after Prince of Persia, it seems like you decided, I'm not so sure about studio movies necessarily, because you really haven't gone back to them. And I mean that with I mean, totally, yeah. And I guess I just wonder, and you've talked about this before, so
I've been wanting to ask you this for so long.
I think that movie was the most interesting choice, I feel like.
Yeah.
I mean, the weirdest character that I've ever played in a lot of ways, and that's how I like to try and, I don't make choices like that, but I do like to sort of, I've always had the similar mentality, you know, which is what's over there, that looks really far away. Could I get there? I don't know. Looks kind of weird and scary. Let's try. And then, so that, it wasn't any different, really. But, yeah, I mean, it all became more recently about preparation. I really deeply believe that freedom is on the other side of discipline. And I've learned that from a lot of experiences that I've had with filmmakers, in particular, like really extraordinary directors, to see them prepare. In particular, someone like David Fincher, who is so prepared, and in that way, there's this freedom on the opposite side. And I wanted to try and emulate that in a way in the work that I do, you know, for a director. And that was really a conscious choice. But yeah, I don't think there's a decision. This is lofty, but I believe that the universe will sort of bring things to you. And if you're in tune enough, then you can kind of catch a piece of it and then ride it for a second.
I really do. I admire so much what you've done in the 3 or 4 years.
No, man.
Was that a little?
Yeah. No, my version of that is being the spokesman for T-Mobile. So.
But just for the record, in all seriousness, in the last 3 or 4 years, End of Watch, Prisoners, Enemy, so many that are either indie films. I think End of Watch was like a nothing budget. Prisoners maybe a little more, but it's still such a unique kind of indie-minded film. It's just, to quote James Franco, this is the reconnaissance people should be talking about. You know, it was pretty amazing. But
yeah,
let's go.
Was amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
Prisoners is so
Prisoners,
good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm being honest now. I like it.
So, I mean, that was born actually out of a movie I did with Denis Villeneuve called The Enemy, which was we shot in Toronto. It was like a co-Spanish Canadian finance film that was based on a Jose Saramago novel, and that was a very small film that we did, and that was an exploration. And then we went and did another movie together. So again, I hate using the word small, but a movie like that then brought us together on another film.
Yeah. One of the things that it seems like independent movies offer people the opportunity to do more often if they choose than studio movies do is to develop sort of collaborators and recurring partners that you want to work with. And I think, I know JC's worked with the same producers on each of his features. I think Damien, from the short to the feature, you've had some friends that you've collaborated with consistently, and across the board, Denis Villeneuve, we were just talking about. But I think the ultimate model of this, and it's such an amazing story that I hope, Tilda, you'd be willing to share, is your relationship with Derek Jarman, which I think was the first 7 movies of your career over a period of 9 years, and up until his very untimely passing. So it's a pretty amazing thing, and I hope you would talk about it.
Well, this is where I got my habit of just working with my friends. I first met Derek Jarman at the very point when I was determined to stop messing around thinking of being a performer. We became friends, which usually happens first, and then we made a film together, and then we made another 7 films together. And so the habit that I got was this habit of working in collaboration, in development, in a kind of family scenario, which of course ends up being about making family movies. I mean, all our films that we made over those 9 years are actually home movies, whether they're adaptations of Edward II by Marlowe, or whether they're some Super 8 gnarly thing of me crawling through stones for 90 minutes with Simon Fisher Turner soundtrack. It's all home movie, and so the habit that it grew in me was this habit of real comfort. And so when he very ridiculously left the building 9 years later, he died of AIDS in 1994, which I can't believe is 20 years ago, but it is. I was kind of up a gum tree because I only had this habit, and I still hadn't decided to be an actor, and I still didn't have any skills, and I just wanted things to be that comfortable. And so I've continued to be lucky in finding people, or at that point they started to find me, who wanted to build up habits of their own. This is starting to sound really sick, but it is a bit sick, because it ends up all being about working with Mitarbeiter, as they say in German. And it's the way to do it. I mean, we were starting to make independent films in the days that we were working originally. The first film I made with him was in 1985, which is 30 years ago next year. Oh, yes. And in those days, what we were making were, in fact, not called independent films. It was before independent films got a kind of capital I. And it was sort of in the very relatively early days of Sundance. It was when Sundance was a sort of, have you heard of this place sort of place. And it was before what I would call codependent films, and I think we all know what they mean. They were experimental films in the sense that they lived off the audience. That was, you never really felt like you were going to be building your audience. You were just going to rely on the audience that you had, and no one was relying on you to make any money anyway, so that was a great relief. No, Derek Jarman, he was an extraordinary filmmaker. Anybody who doesn't know about him, please go and look for him. He was the filmmaker. When young filmmakers say that they would like to know if it's possible to be really self-determining as an artist and yet kind of out there and really present in the world as a political activist, I say Derek Jarman. And when they say, I've never heard of him, as I say to you, go and find out all about him, because he was that man. And the really interesting thing about those days was that a film like The Last of England, which we made, which was a Super 8 film blown up to 35 with this completely non-narrative structure and Simon Fisher-Turner, amazing music, was not shown in some cinematheque or really late on some film channel television channel that you can't find earlier than 2 o'clock in the morning. It was shown in London in the Prince Charles Cinema just off Leicester Square. It got massive, really terrible, but really massive, terrible reviews in all the massive papers. You know, he was someone who was constantly in the cultural discourse. He was, you know, being interviewed on very important in very important forums always. And that's changed. It feels like, you know, there's a sort of marginalization which then came about. But I would really agree. I'm also an optimist. I think things are, you know, bad times bring new good times. And I think there's an audience which is so hungry for this kind of filmmaking that, you know, we just have to keep warm and muddle through. And it's all about creating the audience. And any film festival, AFI included, is about doing exactly that, encouraging people to stretch the elastic of what they think they like. You know, come and see this movie. You don't know anybody in it. You can't pronounce any of their names. You've never heard of this language. But come, because you know what? We're advising you. We're curators. You know, we've seen it and we think it's great. Trust us. Come. And then that will stretch your appreciation of cinema just a little bit more. Yeah, that whole festival culture is incredibly important for filmmaking. I think we would all agree with that. Yeah.
The premier sort of award show that recognizes independent movies is known as the Indie Spirit Awards, the Independent Spirit Awards. And I do think there is something to be said for, you know, some people really do. You can see through their work, there is an independent spirit that goes through it. And I want to come back to Kristen on this because I think how old were you when you first started?
Like 9.
9, and a lot of the stuff
Room,
that...
or what was it? Panic Room? Was that your first film? Or no?
I did one little movie before that, but that was like the first thing that yeah.
And there were a lot of little independent spirited movies before that, and I wonder how you found when this whole phenomenon of Twilight came along, and you then continued to make independent movies in between them, which I don't know where you had the time, but you continue to do that throughout. And have continued to do it after. Did you feel that, and I want to pose this to several people up here have had the experience where you do a big movie, and then I wonder, do you feel that it actually makes it easier or harder for you to find smaller projects that you want to be a part of, that you're passionate about? Do people have a harder time seeing you in those parts, or does it make them want you more? What was your experience with that?
Well, you know, that thing he was saying about independent film's biggest opponent being, you know, studio films, or the fact that they're not even that they're not competing whatsoever because they're so different and they're so polarized and the audiences are so polarized, and so they don't really have anything to do with one another. I'm with her. I don't make decisions. I really, genuinely am very much blown with the wind. Like, you know, I follow the gut. I think that it's, you know, it's not been a tactical approach to be able to be like, I'm going to balance these independent movies with these bigger ones. I completely stand behind the idea that I am drawn to things, you know, regardless of their size, because I really like them. And, you know, I've gotten lucky. And then, you know, a lot of people say, like, God, you must be so appreciative. It opens so many doors. You can do whatever you want. It's like, yeah, but that's, you know, like where this question is, what this question is speaking to, I guess, is that, you know, do people on the indie side, because it's so polarized, it's like, like I said, it is us and them. Do the indie folk now they don't see me like that anymore. So I'm not cool enough to fit into the indie scene. I've done too many commercial projects, and now it's like, I'm the Twilight girl, and there it is. But I haven't really. I've had a really great time working with people that, we mutually get off on the work that we do, and it's been busy, and it's been really, really loaded, and I don't know. I mean, I think it's really important to do both. I have a weird thing about agreeing with the whole one for them, one for me, because that is so painful. My God, like to fully feel like you're not doing something for yourself. I'm not good enough. Like I would just want to die. But it definitely makes it easier to do the smaller things you'd like to do. I think, it would be, like I wouldn't be admitting something if I wasn't honest about the fact that, yeah, I can greenlight a movie now that I've, done 5 Twilight movies. But I don't know, man. I think if you're just doing things for the right reason, there's really like no way to like quantify it or say like I'm doing this because of this. I'm until I start making movies for myself as an actor, you're just like a hired hand, and you can have like this little, even if something doesn't completely equal success, if you don't look at it and go, this element, including script and director and rest of cast and budget and this and that, it's like, I'm fully willing to hop on something if I'm interested in one person involved in it, or if I'm interested in one line that my character says that I'm dying to say. I will make a bad movie, because it's like, whatever, I'm an actor on it. I didn't make it myself. So it's, I think both, yeah.
Yeah. And Bill, now sort of jumping off of that, you've now really sort of impressed a lot of people this year with the indie work that you've done, and congratulations with the Gotham nomination as well. It's a big one. And I just wonder for you, if the next call you get is a big studio saying, we want you to be a part of this, how do you have any, how do you approach that decision? Is that, what's the thought process there?
I mean, it's kind of like what everyone else is saying. I mean, you just kind of go with your gut and what you like. And I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I get excited about any sort of work. I got 2 kids, man. I mean, almost 3. Yeah, my wife is going to go into labor any second with her 3rd. But no joke. And I'm really nervous right now. No, but it's so yeah. It's like you take it's that thing where I want to. You want to do something that you would go see. I mean, that's kind of the thing, I would just, that's a film I would go see. Or, like you were saying, there's one line or one person is in the movie, you go, oh, I get to have a scene with so-and-so? Are you kidding? Yes, I'm going to go do that, And a lot of those are indie movies. I mean, most of the scripts I get sent, it's always like, awesome script, this is great, awesome, we're still looking for funding, And Skeleton Twins, it was 2 years, that we waited around for the money for it, so.
How much of a calculation, again, I know that a lot of people are saying it's a gut, and this is a separate, it's not the same question, I don't think, but you have a movie that you really, let's say there's a script you really care about, a filmmaker you really want to work with, but in some cases with a little independent movie, there's not necessarily a distributor lined up, and it's tough material, and maybe it might not be easy to get a distributor. Are you willing, how important is it to know that this work is going to be seen? If a tree falls in a forest and nobody's there, doesn't make a sound. Is that, Marion, is that a thought when you look at a script that, I want to, it's why do it if if it's not something that a lot of people are going to get a chance to see?
It had never really been important for me to. I mean, of course, when you tell a story, you want people to listen to it. But yeah, sometimes that few people are gonna listen to it. But that it's an important story for you to tell, and especially for a director to tell. Last year, I did this James Gray's movie, which was a very hard subject, and that you know that it's going to be a small amount of people who are going to see it, but then you're in a story with a director, and it's a very personal movie for him. He spent many years of his life building this story, and it doesn't matter if it doesn't have like a huge success, because it's a need. One of the most important things for me when I work with a director is that I must feel that it's almost a need of life or death to tell a story. And I mean, life or death is a little strong, but something that, yeah, just a need. And I was offered like big movies, and you know that a lot of people are going to see those movies, but then after a meeting with the director and trying to talk about the subject and trying to talk about the reason for him to do, or her to do this movie, and this person avoiding this question because there was no answer. I will never be able to go in an adventure without a captain who could give his life for his boat.
Yeah. And go see The Immigrant, because that is a great movie, and you were great in it, and I don't know why it didn't get more. Michelle, I want to kind of continue that question with you, because there was a movie, Trucker, about 7 years ago that you were unbelievable in, and it was at Tribeca, I think, that I saw it. And I think I know Roger Ebert wrote, you deserved an Oscar nomination for it, and a lot of people that saw it agreed. Unfortunately, not a lot of people saw it because it was, it was bought by a small distributor who did their best, similar, I think, to Fort Bliss. And it just is tough because some of these operations are just upstarts, and I wonder, there's
if I'm a glutton for punishment.
Pardon me?
If I'm a glutton for punishment.
Yeah, right. But like there's I've heard both sides of an argument about that, which is that on the one hand, as journalists, perhaps we should be getting on the case of these smaller operations to do more to get these movies that are so great more attention. But on the other hand, I've been told that pull back on that, because if you do that too hard, they won't get involved with some of these movies in the first place. So what are you, having gone through a few of these, really, to me, it's frustrating to me. I'm sure it's at least as frustrating, and probably more for you. What's your take on that question?
It is frustrating. It is. But at the same time, when you sign on to do something, when you do an independent film, I mean, listen, I think I can probably speak for all of us here that none of us signed on to our movies to make a quick buck, or feeling like there was guaranteed distribution. We signed on to these roles because we were compelled to, and listen, you probably can knock me down 10 times, but I'll come back up because I love what I do, and hopefully, kind of going through the process a few times is sort of just being able to maybe learn a little bit more about that aspect of putting an independent film together, and knowing sort of the strategy, and sort of trying to kind of being a quarterback in a sense, and sort of learning that aspect, and really sort of pushing people, and just, helping and encouraging, and, standing behind what you and the filmmakers have created, So that's all you can do, at the end of the day, is just go and do something you're really, really proud of. And then just encourage other people to, to stand by it, and to embrace it, That's all I got.
I guess one of the occupational hazards of making indies is that they can sometimes break your heart. And I think for JC, before Margin Call, really kind of took everybody by storm and wound up with you at the Oscars, and just a great success story. You had one of these projects that
8 years.
Yeah, please take it away.
Yeah, I wrote a script in my like mid-20s, and which I think you have to do sometimes when you're directing a movie. You kind of have to choose at some point, which can be a great risk. But this is what I'm going to do next, and or not next, but first, I guess. And I did that, and this was back when you actually used to have to put down payments, essentially deposits on it to secure an actor's time, and it was a little more money flowing around. And the movie, after about 8 years of working on it and kind of messing with it in many different ways, finally got an investor, and we had, I think, a 15 or 20% of the budget deposit that they gave us. And my daughter, who is now 9, was about 6 months old, and I was doing commercial work at the time, and I'd stopped doing that, and this was it. And through 9 different things that had nothing to do with us, it was all financial in the investor's life. He pulled out of 3 movies in New York at the same time, and at that point I had like $400,000 or $500,000 against the script, which they wanted to be paid back on before we could shoot it. They basically owned the script at that time. And, I was sitting on the street crying. I mean, that was it. You sort of realized pretty quickly, about a week after that all went down, that movie probably would never get made. And, that could have been the end of my career, frankly, and almost was. So then, I sat down, and in 3 or 4 years later, I sat down and wrote an 82-page version of the Margin Call script in 3 days. Never changed a word of it. Added about 12 pages in the weeks following. Never really edited a piece of dialogue in the entire thing. And 6 months later, I was shooting a movie with, the cast that ended up making that movie. So I don't know if there's a good story in there, but, in a way, when I now look back at my life, I realized that I had actually been learning so much through all those years of struggle, and I actually learned how to make a movie, grew up, was then given all these opportunities because suddenly I was, on the up and up. And instead of, in a weird way, having watched a lot of my friends and competitors and people that I'd been working with for all those years, have one great film come along and not make the right film second, which, the terrible thing about actors is they're not in as much control over what roles they get. The wonderful thing about actors is you get to have more swings at the bat, obviously. And, these things take us, 3 years if you're working quickly. So you don't get that many swings at it. And I think, looking back on it now, the maturity that I had gained both as a filmmaker and, frankly, more importantly, as a person, and the knowledge, frankly. The fact that I hadn't made my first feature film by the time I turned 30 was a horrible, horrible failure in my life for a long time. And then you sort of realize that's part of the reason why I hadn't made a film before I was 30, right? It was because that was somehow in my value system. So by washing myself of that and kind of frankly looking at a life of potentially not being able to be a storyteller, allowed me to come back to it with a sense of confidence and a sense of purpose, and frankly just the knowledge of, like, if they're offering you, in the sort of weeks after Margin Call was premiered, I got a world of offers, and just the simple realization that, like, those will probably be there if I go to choose make a movie about like one guy alone on a boat, you know, and those other things will be there as long as that movie is good, right? And that's the one that I, as you were saying, Tilly, that I couldn't not make for some ridiculous reason, and but that felt like the only choice at that time. I think I don't know. The takeaway for me is, it's also the Sundance question that you were asking earlier. The crazy thing about Sundance, for me, is Margin Call, and I tease John Cooper about this all the time now. Margin Call was basically not accepted into Sundance, and so Sundance changed my life. I met Robert Redford. My film was reviewed well. I met Robert Redford, and here I am off to the races. But I was also the same exact movie that went out into the world and did that and changed my life, almost wasn't let into that festival, and was sort of artfully given not so great a slot, if you remember, but it was sort of let in at the last moment. That is the sort of frustratingly but yet beautiful thing about what we're trying to do when you're making these movies. When you're talking about a movie, hopefully when you look at a movie and you're deciding as an actor whether to do it or not, you really, have no idea where that movie is going to end up and how it's going to get out into the world. And the ones that seem like they're, like that they're in way left field end up being the ones, that come back. And I think, having been wanting to do this since I was 15 years old, and that's 25 years of watching very closely different people's careers as filmmakers come and go. It's the ones that are sort of most interested in, is it what they wanted to do and is it good, right? So is the end product great? And if it is, even if no one ends up seeing that movie, meaning in the broader spectrum, you as an artist made that one instead of this one, and 9 times out of 10, if you're thinking about this as a career or as a life as an artist, making those choices is, again, as long as it's good. Someone came up to me and I was talking to them about this, and it's like, if the movie doesn't end up very good, then it's all bets are off. Maybe you should have done the other one. But as long as you are confident and that it's going to be good, right? And that's the only reason for us to start a movie, is you actually think it's going to be good, and hopefully for actors as well. Go to that one, because that's got the best chance.
Yeah.
I was going to say too that I think that there is a responsibility to the financial aspect of a film. I mean, I think that's important to know that, we do work in a business, and that there are people, though, there are always conversations about financiers and about, the whole system and how sort of crazy it can be and all that. I think there is a responsibility there, and I think that it's very important that time and money that is given to create, that we're given to create something, is not to be taken lightly. To know that it's a lot of money, and hopefully you'll get it back for those people. Yeah. That's part of.
We're not painting. I mean, there's 200 people that got to stand around, so it's absolutely a piece of and that's why the budget should come down. I think there's a responsibility. Every movie I've made, knock on wood, has made the money back for the people that put the money up, and that's that's very important. But that's also because you have to be realistic about what it costs to make one of these things.
Well, just as an addendum to that, I want to ask you, JC. So it's only been, I think, 4 years since Margin Call. Three very successful movies. Margin Call, All Is Lost, and now Most Violent Year. And you're at, again, one of these sort of interesting moments, because your next film is, each one has, I think, gotten slightly bigger. Next one is actually, I believe, a studio movie, $100 million budget. It's a big change for you. And how do you feel that you're ready for, what's your thought going into that?
I mean, I happen to come across an insanely, I'm getting that much money to tell an original story, which doesn't happen, basically. And so Lionsgate is taking some of what Tilda was talking about. They're realizing, and I think, and there's starting to be that feeling around here that, investing in original storytelling is a is a must at this point. If you look at some of these release schedules that these studios are putting out, you know, I'm starting to get a feeling that people are starting to realize that may be trouble on the horizon, and you can't just keep telling the same story over and over again. And there's a lot of really interesting things happening on planet Earth right now that deserve to have stories told about them. And so Lionsgate came to me, and you know, after I looked at a lot of different, you know, I wanted to tell a story on a larger canvas, and I was looking at a lot of those different things, and I just feel incredibly fortunate with that. I mean, they're spending well over $100 million on telling a contemporary story, basically, and so, you know, that's the outlier right now, and I'm very humbled, and I feel very fortunate to be able to give them that opportunity, but the storytelling there has to, I mean, just so you know, the decision-making is exactly the same. That's a story where once I realized what it was and what they were trying to do, that I sort of couldn't think of anything else to do but that. And I think the same rule applies. You just need more people to come see it to make its money back, obviously.
I just want to really say on behalf of everybody here, thank you for your work, thank you for